This morning, I've come out to face my photography fear. See, as somebody who enjoys long exposure photography, what you need is a still and stable tripod. No movement at all. Today's windy as crap. Doesn't mix well with my chosen genre of photography. I'm hoping it works out. So for this first photograph, I've managed to get down a little bit closer to something that's usually under the water when I get here. So there is a light beacon or something at the end of this rock wall at Mappleton. And we're just going to go nice and punched in on it. We've got some rocks in the bottom right hand corner that are nice and dominant and big in the frame. And we're just going to see what we can do with all this water as it's retreating. I've got a 10 stop filter on the polarizer. I'm down at f7.1. It's giving me roughly 4 seconds of exposure time. I'll be honest, 4 seconds is a little bit, well, it's a little bit slower than I would normally go. But I just want to see what happens. See how good this tripod is. Now here we go. 4 second exposure. Here's the photo. So what is it that I enjoy so much about long exposure photography that means that I spend a lot of my free time by the coast, tasting salt and soaking wet through? I like the idea that you can show things that you wouldn't see with your own eye. You can slow time down in effect, can't you? When I come to the coast and I look for this kind of stuff, I try and find things where the water is making texture and pattern, and it shows that it's a living thing in a sense. All of the swells and everything, especially when you have choppy sea like this, using a slower shutter speed to really slow your exposures down, it just allows you to see things that you would otherwise not be able to see. And that fascinates me. It always has with a camera. And it was the genre I landed on as soon as I picked up a camera. I went out and bought a cheap £10 screw-in 10 stop filter. And that was it. I was hooked. When I first started doing the long exposure photography, I fell into that trap of the longest exposure possible to flatten and smooth everything out as much as you possibly can. And as time's progressed, my shutter speeds have actually gotten faster and faster and faster. And I've kind of moved away from that completely flattened out smoky water look. I think it's a little bit cliche for the genre.
In a backyard years ago, in a town I didn't know.
So this photo here has taken some real sort of thought and figuring out. Now I've moved a little ways down the beach and there is another rock wall that's used to break the tide and protect the beach. And at low tide there was all of these pebbles and rocks and everything. I've never seen them before, but I kind of thought if we get the ultra wide angle lens on, get down low to the deck and find a rock to use as a foreground interest and take all of the filters off and really come out of my comfort zone a little bit. I'm using a polarizing filter just to cut through the glare. You can see all of the rocks behind me. They're all a little bit wet and there's still a little bit of water around. So I'm using the polarizing filter just to cut through some of the glare. But yeah, let's see how it turns out. So polarizing filter on. f5.6, it's giving me a 250th of a second at the base ISO on this camera, which is 200. So I'm using all the rocks and the pebbles just to lead up to the rock wall and the beacon at the end of it. So let's go ahead, using a 2-second timer, and let's just see how this turns out. Now, another one of my so-called photography fears involves the use of this lens right here. It's macro photography, and while we're out exploring and experimenting and getting over our fears a little bit, we've done long exposure photography in a bit of a wind. I've taken a photograph at the coast without any filters. And it kind of feels fitting to throw the macro lens on and take a third photograph of a genre that I'm not entirely comfortable with and I feel I'm not all that good at. So I thought, stuff it, we'll throw the macro lens on and just try something at the beach. Now, I've had two ideas of a photograph here. We could find some pebbles and just take a textury, somewhat artsy-fartsy photograph of the pebbles on the beach, fair enough. Or we could play with and experiment with one of macro photography's flaws in a sense. Macro photography, in order to get any real depth of field, you need to be down at a really narrow aperture. And when you're down at a really narrow aperture, you have this thing called light and the lack of it. Well, I kind of thought that I like long exposure photography and we could use a natural weakness of macro photography to create a long exposure macro photograph on the beach, which means I'm going to have to get really close to the water with a tripod and a camera about this far away from the water, and what could possibly go wrong? But I'm kind of hoping we may be able to create a really nice looking photograph using that. I have in my mind some pebbles and surf and bubbles, and that's what I'm going to attempt to do. I just need to go find a place where I can do it. Let's go for a wander down the beach and see if we can find somewhere. This really is as difficult and as awkward as it probably sounds. Here's one. Come on, come on, come on, come on. That worked out reasonably well. The difficulty here is finding focus, because the plane of focus that I have when I'm focusing, the water and the bubbles are slightly above that. But it seems to be working on the camera. I'll show you a couple of these quick test shots that I've taken. It's good fun. It's definitely different. So I'm down at f10, which is a lot narrower than I would really ideally like to be. Giving me a 30th of a second ISO to 100, which is just slow enough to allow some of this foam and some of the bubbles to form, but also streak to give a slight long exposure look. But it's difficult and it's faffy. The filter thread on the front of this lens is 46mm, and I don't have a step-up ring capable of going that small, so it's a bit of a shame. I was hoping to be able to throw a polarizing filter on, just to cut through some of the reflection and slow the shutter speed down a little bit more. But some of these seem to be working. So I'm going to sit here and take a bunch of photographs, and I'll show the best ones to you. Well, that concludes another little adventure down to Mappleton. The tide's all but gone out now, so anything else is futile because there's no tide really to play with, which is a shame, but it's just how it goes. So to sum up today, I had fun. I think the photographs are going to be a little bit on the rubbish side, but it was just a bit of an experiment just to get out and do things that I wouldn't normally do and just try things slightly differently. I had fun doing it, and that is the main thing. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the little mess about today, please do give the video a thumbs up and a like. It does help the video and it brings new viewers to see my content. And if you liked it a little bit more than that and you thought the photos weren't all that rubbish, there's a subscribe button below me. You can press that and you'll see more nonsense from me, well, every single week. So until the next time, I'm going to love you and leave you and just say peace and goodbye.